Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome to our panel, ISO 20022, a standard in practice. My name is Judy Lee. I am the Director of Data Analytics, Information Management, and ISO 20022 Center of Excellence at Payments Canada. I am delighted to be joined by a wonderful group of panelists today to discuss various factors around this open global standard. We all know ISO 20022 for its rich and structured data and how it will support efficiency, innovation, and improved payments experiences. As more businesses and countries adopt the standard, benefits will compound, creating opportunities for businesses and consumers yet to be imagined. This session will look at keys to unlocking benefits and approaches for driving uptake. I'm expecting a fascinating conversation. But first, let's meet with our panelists. I would like to invite each of them to introduce themselves. Marcus, can we start from you?
Thanks, Judy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's going to be listening to this. My name is Marcos Cameron. I work for Swift here out of the New York office. My title is the go-to-market SPOC on ISO. So the single point of contact internally for our account managers with any questions around ISO, the ISO implementation, and the rollout to customers. I've been lucky enough to be at Swift. It's going on 7 years now, and my background is in IT and systems infrastructure and integration and standards. So I came to Swift understanding some of the payment standards and took advantage of the opportunity for the last 3 years to work on this, what I think is a great initiative to migrate the world to ISO 20022.
Welcome, Marcus. Over to you, David.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Renault. I'm working from EBA Clearing. EBA Clearing is an operator of payment platforms in Europe, from high-value payments to batch payments and more recently instant payments. And my main focus right now is on SEPA payments, so more the retail side of things. But I worked previously with the European Central Bank on the target payment. And when I joined EBA Clearing, I also worked on Euro 1, so I know also pretty well the high value side of things when it comes to payments. And I'm very happy to be with you today.
Welcome, David. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks. Yes, my name is Rob Magee. I'm the Program Director for the Australian ISO 20022 Industry Migration Program at AusPayNet. And AusPayNet is the payments industry self-regulator in Australia, and it's the administrator of the Australian high-value system. So, including the closed user groups, the membership, the rules and regulations that sit around that system. The difference in Australia to many market infrastructures is that the role of the administrator of the high-value system and the operator of the market infrastructure have been separated. So AusPayNet is the administrator of the system, but it's the Reserve Bank of Australia that runs the RTGS system, not AusPayNet. So that's just something that's makes us a bit different from other markets. And since almost the end of last year, I've also been the Australian representative on the HVPS Plus group, which is the group convened by Swift, charged with the maintenance of the market infrastructure template for ISO 20022.
Welcome, Rob. So ISO 20022 is being adopted worldwide as we speak. Payments Canada just launched the high-value system links with the adoption of ISO 20022, and the standard is also being used in different payment systems in Europe, UK, United States, Australia, Singapore, Japan, and many other countries are also in the process for consideration of the adoption. So as many jurisdictions take on this journey, I would like to invite our panelists to discuss our first question. We would like to know a bit more about your approach to implementing ISO 20022 and what are the key drivers. So Marcus, maybe we can start from you. So at Swift, what are the key drivers you're seeing across jurisdictions?
So I think you just mentioned it, right? The adoption of ISO by the multiple domestic market infrastructure. So Swift being the global network for cross-border payments, we touch pretty much banks in almost every country around the world. And as you were saying, as some of the market infrastructures like Canada have adopted, and others are planning to adopt ISO, like the Fed in the US and Bank of England and others. We are here to support the community. And what we had to do was we have to come up with, once we were told by our bank members, hey, we want to do the cross-border payments in ISO as well, so that we can leverage the standard for both our domestic and cross-border. Our biggest challenge was we have 11,000 member banks, right? So not everyone was going to be ready for a big bang, whether that was a like for like or a big bang to full ISO. So we came up with the concept of a coexistence period where we would allow SWIFT members to send ISO if they're ready, to send and receive the legacy MT for a while till 2025, which is the cutover date when we're converting all the old legacy payments MT messages to ISO. And what we did to facilitate that was we introduced the concept of inflow translation, which is a process where if you're a sender bank and you're ISO ready, you can send your ISO message, and your receivers, if they're ISO ready, can receive and process. If they're not, we can leverage this inflow translation and provide an MT version of the message to the banks that are still lagging a little bit behind. So that's pretty much our adoption approach, and the driver to make sure that we can satisfy all the different banks around the world, whether their MIs are going ISO right now or later or not at all.
Thank you, Marcus. David, what are your thoughts on this?
In Europe, the first adoption of ISO 20022 globally was mandated by the regulator, by European Commission, to create the single European payment area, also called as SEPA, with an objective to harmonize and standardize retail payment across Europe. So we have now long history actually with ISO 20022, because SEPA project started almost 20 years ago and came to production since about 10 years. Now, more recently, with the high-value in the high-value payment domain, the migration of Target, the RTGS operated by the European central banks, was the key driver for us to also consider migrating our high-value payment system Euro 1 from FIN to ISO, to make sure that our members can use the same standard as the one they use with the Target system, so that they have a consistent usage of high-value payment, whether it goes to Target or Euro 1. They have exactly the same. They look exactly the same from a format perspective. The idea for this migration initially was a like-for-like migration, and at some point it became clear that it was not the best way to take advantage of ISO 20022 with more structured data, with a richer data set, and so on. So it was then decided to change the approach and to move for a full adoption of ISO 20022 and to go for a big bang approach. So we are happy to say that exactly 1 month ago, on the 20th of March, this migration has taken place, and all in all, rather smoothly.
That's wonderful to hear, David. So Rob, what's the story in Australia?
Yeah, well, some similarities and some differences to both of the other panelists. So we set out looking at the options. We considered Big Bang, we considered coexistence, and we also looked at like for like, and probably the same time as happened in Europe, we took notice of the advice from PMPG that MIs should probably not go like for like, and so that's when we kind of changed our approach there. We did land on coexistence. We've got 50 participants in Australia, and we felt that gave us flexibility and reduced some risk. Although, of course, now having gone live in March, we still have probably 18 months of work ahead of us because of our coexistence approach to get everyone domestically fully across onto the ISO format. But really that was our approach. It's a program that's been running for 3 years to get everyone ready for the minimum requirement to be able to receive the ISO message. So we don't have domestically the inflow translation that SWIFT provides for cross-border. So everyone has to be able to receive. And we've probably got 30% of our participants on day one originating messages in ISO 20022. And you asked about drivers, and for us it was about seeing what was coming for cross-border and wanting to make sure that we were going to be harmonized with that to move in step with the global community, and really, to not have to deal with all of the truncation kind of issues that we'd have if we stayed on MT when cross-border was going to MX. So for us, it was about sort of future-proofing. It was a strategic case, not a business case as such. So really, that was the driver for Australia.
Thank you, Rob. As we can see, there are some similarity and some unique challenges in terms of the driving forces, but we all know it's wide adoption and consistent use across the ecosystem that will really help unleash its potential. So my next question is, what approaches are you taking to drive uptake, use, and consistent market practices? Can we start from you, David?
Yes. Well, the consistent usage is really important, because ISO 20022 is a standard, but that still allows some room for interpretation. So it's very important to have, in addition to the adoption of ISO 20022, to have set of guidelines, which are then observed, followed by all the players. In the retail market in Europe, for SEPA payments, there is the European Payment Council that defines rule books and implementation guideline. So the rules are being defined, and ISO 20022 is used very consistent way, I would say. For high-value payment systems, it's a bit different there. There is not an EPC that defines rule books and implementation guideline in this domain, but we have other groups that do a fantastic job, like PMPG, CBPR+, and I think it's very important to align market practices to make sure that ISO 20022 as a standard is used in a consistent way, and even on a global scale. In the instant payment domain, it's a bit more recent, but it becomes more and more important. So I think it's also important for instant payment to follow a similar approach as for high value or retail payments. There are some groups like the ISO real-time payment group. There's IP Plus as well, and this also opens some opportunity to align the standards and the way ISO 20022 is used globally.
Thank you, David. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I sort of think about your question more from a local market point of view than the global cross-border piece, and for us, the sort of driving of consistent practice is something that we're trying to have as a planned and managed activity rather than a sort of organic growth. I mentioned we have a coexistence period, so right now we're probably 20% of our traffic is MX, and we will manage the adoption of that through to being fully MX for all traffic by the end of next year. Also, in terms of consistent market practice, we have developed some extensive documentation around back office requirements, and these have sort of morphed into a second volume of procedures for our high value system that all of our participants subscribe to. So, we do have a extensive rule book that really does require consistent market practice. And then as an ongoing piece of work now, we've got this active work stream that's been running for 2 or 3 months to drive or to develop market practice and then drive adoption for structured data within the messages. So right now we have optionality around structured address, around structured remittance. And so, where we want to get to is have either some mandates or some guidelines around best practice to drive common market practice for the use of the messages.
Thank you, Rob. Over to you, Marcus.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, honestly, to echo some of the things already stated, I think one of the drivers for us that has been helpful is the fact that the domestic payments market infrastructures are going, like, Canada, Australia, the EU are going live on ISO. That's helped us promote the message for the cross-border ISO payments. And again, working very closely with those groups already mentioned, such as the PMPG and their cross-border payments or CBPR plus specific working subgroup, and helping everyone to understand how these messages, we have to have good usage of these messages. One of the things we're trying to deter is with the old MT messages, they were 40 years old, right? So they weren't necessarily that fit for purpose anymore. People were finding creative ways to populate them with different information, and we're trying to steer away from that, from the misuse of messages. We're providing a proper ISO message for every function that has to be executed in the payment or reporting chain. So I think that's one of the challenges in uptake and promotion. Again, we were lucky that a lot of the MIs have gone live on ISO so far. So that helped us with our go live, which was exactly a month ago today, on the 20th. And again, but we're seeing the same sort of numbers as I think I hear now Australia is. We started with about 15% of our payments converted over to MX ISO right away, day one. We're seeing a little uptick now to about 20%, but we have to get to 100% ISO by November 2025. So we've been having, we participate in events like this. We have been having webinars that we invite our community to, and we'll continue to do so, because now that we've sort of pushed the big rock up the hill with our larger global transaction banks, we have thousands of smaller and medium banks that we have to roll up our sleeves at Swift and help them get the training that they need, the answers to their questions, connect with their vendors that provide maybe their integration solutions or their back office solutions, and make sure that we're all on the same page, creating the ISO messages that will work for the cross-border payments and their different MIs.
Thank you, Marcus. So when we talk about ISO 20022, the first thing that comes to my mind is its rich data, both in quantity and quality. So where do you see the greatest opportunity created by ISO 20022 adoption? And where do you see challenges? And what do you think how should we overcome them? Can we start from you, Rob?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question, and for me, it looks like the greatest opportunities are also the greatest challenges. So you mentioned the rich data, and clearly for us, I think rich and enhanced data creates the greatest opportunities. But that big challenge is that there's no kind of one size fits all business case. So we have a big range of participants. Marcus mentioned, there's big banks and little banks, and same for us. We have some big global banks that are participants in Australia, but then some quite small ones by comparison. And so for them, if they're a bank that deals with a lot of corporates, the way they look at these messages and how to leverage the benefits is going to be quite different from a bank who's predominantly retail and maybe doesn't have a lot of corporate customers. And so for the opportunity or the solution to that challenge, I think for us is going to be finding the right level of flexibility versus enforced standardization through rules and mandates. For example, the fully structured address, it creates all these opportunities that align very well with the CPMI objectives around speed, cost, and transparency that everyone's looking at the moment. But then, there's a huge challenge in that banks don't have or store that data today in a way that's structured that aligns with the ISO specification. So, and nor do their corporates in many cases. So these corporates who are going to initiate payments have these sort of barriers to being able to provide structured data. And I think, there's going to need to be quite long lead times if there are going to be mandates or guidelines around best practice to use fully structured address, for example. That there's going to be a lot of investment required and quite long lead times, and this also brings in the current conversation around semi-structured address, which I think is going to be a hot topic for the next few months at least. And whilst on the one hand that would ease the adoption of structured address or semi-structured address, but it would need to be balanced with the fact that it probably detracts from actually the value you get from having a non-fully structured set of information. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out too.
David, what are your thoughts?
For a market infrastructure operator like EBA Clearing, ISO 20022 present great opportunities to use more structured data and therefore to improve straight-through processing and automation, reducing the number of exceptions, and therefore the overall cost of processing payment is going down, and that's, I think, really important consideration. Richer data also provide opportunities to provide additional services like business intelligence or sanction screening automation, pattern recognition, which can be key aspects to combat fraud. And yeah, opportunities comes always with challenges, and the fact that you have in a richer data set means that you have also more personal data in the payment messages, and those personal data that are transported in the payment messages must be very well protected at any point in time in the processing chain, in line with GDPR, which is the European regulation, but you have similar regulations everywhere in the world, and those must be respected, of course. Another opportunity with the global adoption of ISO 20022 is to link market infrastructure together to provide better services, to shorten execution time, provide more transparency, in particular in the cross-border, cross-currency payments. And on that note, just after the pandemic, EBA Clearing, together with the Clearinghouse and SWIFT, we came together in a new initiative called IXB for immediate cross-border payments, thinking on how we could leverage on the building blocks like the RT1 instant payment system of EBA Clearing, the RTP instant payment system of the Clearinghouse, and the TMP platform from SWIFT to link our instant payment system running on ISO 20022, being open 24/7 to enable euro-dollar payments with immediate finality within seconds and not days. So there's a great potential here. And last challenge that I will mention, that also richer data comes with a richer character set. ISO 20022 is based on UTF-8, and we see sometimes there is still some frictions with certain banking applications to accept a richer character set. Number of applications are still running on a very restricted character set, basically a few letters and numbers and nothing else. But I think we have to recognize that the world is going global, that what is a special character for me is not a special character for my neighbor. And it comes also with a certain diversity. And I think it's important to embrace this diversity and evolve and make sure that we also able to accept all the characters that ISO 20022 can provide.
Thank you, David. Marcus, what are your thoughts on the opportunities and the challenges?
I mean, honestly, I'm very optimistic about the implementation of ISO, right? I mean, I think the opportunities are truly possibly endless. I use the analogy often when presenting to people. I was like, we all remember when we grew up in our houses, we had a phone on the wall, and that was your only device to make a phone call and contact someone you knew, right? So the only way of sending payments internationally for a lot of people was the old Swift MT messages. At one point, we introduced mobile phones. We were able to make that same phone call anywhere, out running errands at work, and that's sort of like the like-for-like implementation of ISO, right? But where are we today? Smartphones. Our phones are our video cameras. Our phones are remember we used to send telegrams through Western Union. Those are our text messages. We can share pictures, or a Rolodex of addresses. It's just the things we can do are amazing. And I think when we start, leveraging the ability to have all these additional data elements, these data fields, this rich data, this structured data, the goal, of fast and frictionless, which is the SWIFT mantra for international payments, will be achieved. We'll be able to get the payments from end to end with the data in the right places, complete data, structured data, available for screening for financial crimes, and minimizing, the exceptions and investigations. The downside of everything, which, both these guys have mentioned that I think is the elephant in the room is, for lack of a better word, technology upgrade, right? I think we're dealing with a lot of banks that have had systems for 10, 15, 20, 40 years that they've been, bolting on technology. And at some point, you've got to bolt on this ISO technology, or you have to replace it or upgrade it. And I think this is a huge opportunity for software vendors or for banks themselves who want to recode their systems. I think there's I tend to be overly optimistic, but I think even in the downside, there's opportunity for growth. So.
I love optimism. I agree with you. I think there's a lot of potential there. So when we talk about the power of data, what it can, the insights we're able to extract, we have to talk about the flip side of the same coin. That's the standardization, the governance, and ownership. And that has to be properly defined for us to really maximize the benefits. So what do you think, how can we effectively collaborate to make sure consistent interpretation of data? So Mark, since we have you, do you mind to start?
Sure. So already, because Swift is a global enterprise, right? We are lucky that we have people all over the world that understand standards, that have worked with some of these, domestic MI implementations, like Canada, for example. I happen to sit 10 feet away from the head of Canada and listening to all the PayCan calls over the last few years. So, we're very lucky that we have those relationships. We sit on a lot of the groups, so PMPG, others, and we have these opportunities like this where we can, in the industry, talk to each other, attend and represent in each other's events, and go ahead and keep working towards the goal. It's in it for all of us, right? To make sure that what we do is harmonized. It's easy for our customers, our common customers, the banks, to implement, and everyone knows what the rules are, and we follow the rules, and therefore we can get, to echo David, not payments in days anymore, payments in minutes, seconds sometimes, because we've got the right data, we've got the right systems, and it's straight through processing because everything is as it should be. So.
Definitely. David?
Yes, standardization is really a key driver and key reason also to adopt ISO 20022. We cannot think in isolation anymore. Again, the world is really going global. In our systems like your one, it's a system that operates euro payments, but as a matter of fact, there are many of these euro payments that originates from the US, from South America, from Asia. So it's really important that we understand the standard in the same way. And that's also the same for SEPA, actually. SEPA is, in principle, isolated from the rest of the world. It's expected to be euro payment between European citizens or companies. But as a matter of fact, there are also in SEPA a significant number of payments that originate from outside SEPA. And the European Payment Council is now taking stock of this reality, and there is a new scheme that has been published recently for one leg out payments, which will also based on ISO 20022, and will make sure that those payments that have one leg in the Eurozone, but that will end their journey somewhere else, will follow the common market practices. And to make sure that we have a consistent approach. It was already mentioned, but I will mention again the market practice group like the PMPG, like CBPR Plus, or in the instant payment domain, IP Plus, and the ISO real-time payment group to create common market practices, because the ISO 20022 is a common language for financial institutions and market infrastructure, sorry. And we have to make sure that we have a common grammar and syntax to understand how to use this language in the right way.
Thank you, David. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll start off talking, I guess, about our domestic kind of approach to this, and we do work very collaboratively with all of our participants. And so, you know, it's a constant collaboration effort to come up with, you know, a common understanding, a common interpretation of data and the rules that underpin it. And so really for us to sort of effect that, I mentioned before, we've produced a lot of documentation around interpretation and use of the messages. And so that puts everyone on a common understanding of what we're doing and how they should operate in our new ISO 20022 world. And again, to sort of promote that, we are encouraging our participants to call out if they see what they perceive to be kind of non-standard or incorrect interpretation. So we do try and actively manage non-compliance amongst our participants, just to make sure that you know, if somebody's not populating a message in the right way, that we'll talk to them about that and try and put them straight. But then, just having listened to the other panelists, of course, there's the global side of things as well, and there's a lot of terrific collaboration happening alongside CBPR Plus. There's the HVPS Plus group, which has representation from all around the world, and they're meeting frequently. They've just convened an extra meeting, in fact, in a couple of weeks' time, to talk about learnings from Europe, some input from the UK, and you know, where there is actually a bit of fragmentation or harmonization challenges between market infrastructures and the CBPR Plus standard. So you know, it's really healthy collaboration. It's happening right now in a lot of different areas. So I think, you know, that people are doing the right things. It's going to be a long journey for sure, but I think we've started in the right way.
To have that communication is quite important for us to have that common understanding. So, you know, education would be another piece in the puzzle. I'm curious to know, what approaches have you taken and would you take to educate the community about ISO 20022? Can we start from you, Marcus, again?
Sure thing, Judy. So again, we've been at this, like all of my colleagues and yourselves, for years, right? So I think at Swift, we identified very early that we needed to provide tools. We need to provide tools free of charge that our community could avail themselves of. So we have a My Standards tool where I think many of the banks and our MIs publish your standards, and you use that tool to share your standards with your participants. You know, do some validation, syntax checking on those messages, do some simple testing. We leverage that as well for the CBPR Plus messages. So there's over 18 messages that were rolled out. So we define them. We had the usage guidelines in the My Standards tool. We had the handbooks on how the fields were meant to be used. I think, you know, David mentioned how there's the ISO character set is so rich, but for coexistence, since it has to be aligned with the MT messages, there's some rules that were that were defined by CBPR Plus, such as using the old character set for a few years until 2025, and then we can take advantage of the rich character set. So those tools are there in My Standards. Again, I mentioned someone can go ahead and take that message that they've coded to a Paxo 8 from an old MT103, drop it in there in the readiness portal. It'll say, oh, this is good. This should pass network validation. The next step that I also talked about, our facilitation of the coexistence period with inflow translation. So if you're a bank and you're like, I'm going to produce this ISO message and I want to see what the MT implementation that Swift is going to do for me in the networks to facilitate my customers that aren't ISO ready, you could also use this translation portal on the My Standards tool to drop the ISO message and see the output and see any translation or truncation errors that could occur as well. So we have found that has been incredibly helpful for those banks that were ready to go ahead and produce ISO messages. After that, some of the tools that we did provide as well was this test sparring partner, which was for many of the banks that were not able to go ahead and test with their correspondent banks, right? The JP Morgans, the Citibanks were too busy. We provided this test sparring partner that says, hey, this could mimic for you what a message sent to you by JP Morgan or one of the bigger banks would be, and it will turn it into the inflow translation. You can process it to your back office. So I think providing those free of charge tools there, and I think I may have mentioned, and we may talk about it later, is training tools. We also have free training modules. So everything is there that we hope can get everyone to feel comfortable once they start creating ISO messages, or once they are ready to start testing the receive of the ISO or the multi-part messages with those tools.
Wonderful. I certainly know those tools are being used heavily here at Payments Canada. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, education's a challenge, isn't it? Because the new format is so complex compared to the old one. We've put quite a lot of effort into running a series of online education sessions on particular key topics over the last probably 2 years for our participants. We've put a bit of effort into promoting the Swift the Swift training and the Swift tools that Marco was talking about. There's a lot of stuff there, and we regularly put out newsletters and this sort of information to keep people informed and point them in the right direction. Another aspect, I guess, of our collaborative approach is that we do take our participants, bring them together to share ideas and solutions and common problems and challenges. So that's an area where we can facilitate without necessarily having to be the subject matter experts ourselves, but we can bring the banks together to share ideas, as I say. That's sort of our approach to education in the migration space, moving from MT to MX. But the other area that we're thinking about now is that as new participants come along, so banks that or even financial institutions that are not banks who want to join our high value system, but they're not coming from a place of understanding even MT, so they're new to Swift, new to high value payments. And so we're starting to think about that challenge and how we can put together a package of sort of suggested training material and kind of best practice or help them understand what they need to know before they become an active participant. Some of that stuff will be Swift and some of it may not, I guess, but we're working on that now because we know that we're going to have new members later this year, and we realize that their lack of knowledge is going to be a challenge for us.
Thank you, Rob. Over to you, David.
Yeah, pretty much the same here. A lot of effort spent on the education and training. We've been running year one since 1998 on FIN standards. So when we decided to build a new generation with Swift on the ISO 20022, we thought it would be very important to educate our members that have been using a certain standard for such a long time. So we used as well My Standards, the readiness portal. We organized many webinar sessions, online training, zooming on specific aspects, payment processing, of course, but also reporting, reconciliation, liquidity management, so on. Community testing, very important. So banks can test in isolation, that's fine. They can make sure that it works for their point of view, but community testing is much more powerful, that you bring people together and you make them testing together so that it's much closer than what the reality will be when you will be in production. But sometimes it needs also a bit of a coordination. So we play that role, coordinating the different testing groups, making sure that they can talk together and make sure that everyone is comfortable using the new standards. And yeah, it worked pretty well because we had, in the end, there was a successful migration. So I think those points are really important and really key for success.
Really glad to hear that, David. So all of you have been at this working and advocating ISO 20022 for some time. So Marcus at Swift, you've seen different jurisdictions take on different journey, and Rob and David, you're seeing things in EU as well as Australia, having the migration things getting done. So I'm curious, what is the most important lesson you have learned along the way in your journey with ISO 20022? Can we start from you, Rob?
Yeah, so you're right. We've been on this a long time. It's probably 3 years as a fully active program just to get us to where we are today, which is only halfway there, really. You know, we've got a coexistence approach, so we've got a plan to get everyone fully onto MX over the next 18 months or so. And so I think the lesson for me in what we've done so far is that it is not to underestimate the complexity and the challenge of getting this migration done. You know, the time it takes, the effort it takes, the technical expertise that's required, and taking that on board. You know, we're certainly looking ahead already now to our plan to move to the next version of ISO in 2025. And so for us, you know, the lesson is to start thinking about that as soon as we can, plan ahead, give it all the time that's going to be needed to develop a new set of a new message collection, taking on board, you know, what CVPR Plus are going to do, what's new in the new version, and bring our whole industry through again, you know, this sequence of testing and implementation. We've got a stockpile of changes that we want to make to our message specifications. We took the decision to kind of freeze the specs a couple of years ago so that people could have stable messages for testing. But now, as we look forward and become aware of little discrepancies and areas where the harmonization doesn't quite work with CVPR Plus, we need to correct all of those. And so, yeah, you know, for us, the lesson is this is really complex. We need to give it plenty of time. And I know that there's an ongoing conversation about sort of harmonizing version control and you know, whether MIs around the world and CVPR Plus should sort of try and get in step with moving to new versions. I think that's an interesting challenge or objective. You know, I think it's going to be difficult, and you know, some MIs probably will think they don't want to change versions more often than they have to, because it's, you know, it's such a challenge, and you know, if it's an 18-month cycle to change versions, then is that something you want to try and do every year? So I mean, I'm looking forward to having those conversations with my peers from around the world over the rest of this year.
Thank you, Robert. Over to you, Marcus.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think the biggest lesson learned on our part was we should have somehow, I don't know, incentivize or stress how important it really is to do testing prior to go live, right? I think we, as I said, we provided a lot of tools, so self-testing tools, but to echo, I think what David highlighted, there's really nothing that shows what you don't know or what you're not prepared for till you do true community testing. You truly start exchanging with your partners, and you can catch things that maybe they're doing wrong that they didn't realize they were doing wrong until they sent it to you, and you're like, wait, it shouldn't be this way, or you're doing wrong that you thought you were fine. So I think the opportunity as we roll through the coexistence period for the next few years, and many, so the rest of the small and medium banks are, you know, follow the example of the global transaction banks that started ISO early. Take the training, understand how all these things are, but carve out enough time to really do all the types of testing, unit testing to make sure your messages are validating correctly, you know, testing with yourself or with the free Swift tools like the test sparring partner to shake out and, you know, cross your T's and dot your I's. But the real testing has to happen with your correspondence. And I think it was one of the pleasant surprises was that while we at Swift were asked, it's like, why don't you mandate testing? The MIs are doing it. You know, my standard answer was, we have 11,000 banks. It's going to be nearly impossible to orchestrate all that, right? And who's going to be ready when? So it's like, while the MIs are, you know, you guys are members of those MIs, maybe there's a couple of hundred of you or several dozens, you know, it's a little easier to coordinate that kind of testing. We can think about it going forward now for coexistence. We might have testing gates, but one thing that really pleasantly surprised me was the communities that took it amongst themselves, right? So I think in Mexico, they coordinated their own Mexican community CBPR plus testing to, take it above and beyond and make sure it was not just the free tools, the sample messages, but true messages interchanged. So I think that was one of the things that had again to do better for coexistence. I think we've done a really good job as far as providing training materials, documentation. I mean, I've been at this for 3 years now in the ISO team, and in the beginning I just complained that there was nowhere where everything was written down. Now it's like I can sleep at night. That anything anyone needs to, they will find 1 to 10 different documents on it in our mountain of ISO documentation.
Thank you, Marcus. David?
Yeah, testing. Yeah, never test enough. I agree. Yeah, I would like to say that migrating to ISO 20022 is already a very big project and a very long journey, but actually it's not the end of the journey. And once you're migrated, it's very important to continue to apply a certain discipline or a certain hygiene and make sure that you continue to use ISO 20022 moving forward. It's very easy to, when a new use case is popping up, to start to misuse a certain message or to misuse a certain element. Who cares after all? Then I know it's a little bit more complex to go to ISO or to go to SWIFT as a registration authority for ISO 20022 and say, yeah, we have identified a new use case. You have to create a new message or to change a little bit an existing message. It takes a little bit longer, but I think it's very important to follow that process to make sure that the ISO 20022 evolves according to users' needs and not to try to start to misuse this standard, with this beautiful standard, but complex at the same time, because then you will be losing, right, the initial benefits of moving to ISO 20022, and you start to fragment again, and standardization then moves away, and you will come across the same difficulties that you had before migrating to ISO 20022. So I think it's very important to continue on an ongoing basis to collaborate and to make sure that everyone follows the same market practice.
Thank you, David. So I know we have a little bit more time, so I'm going to ask one more question just for my personal curiosity. I know we talked about we've been at this for a long time. It's a fascinating topic. It needs collaboration. It needs the industry buy-in. There's just so much. But I'm curious for you personally, what has been a pleasant surprise when you're working with ISO 20022? Can I pick on you, Rob, to start?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I suppose I need to be careful how I answer this, because what I want to say is that the biggest pleasure really for me in this program over the last 3 years, but I'll say it's not a complete surprise, but it's been a pleasure the way that there's been this network of peers. So the people that I've met around the globe, from other market infrastructures in Canada, in the Bank of England, in ECB, and EBA, and all these guys have been so supportive and available, and we sort of share information and look at challenges together and go, how are you solving this in your country? And this is how we're solving something in Australia. So that's been a huge pleasure. And equally then locally, the way that the Australian banks have come together and worked to help each other out. And normally these guys are competitors in the banking business, but they're fantastic collaborators, working together. So that was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Rob. I have to echo that. Just the support you get from the global community is overwhelming. Marcus?
I guess I would have to re-echo your echo, because I feel that has been one of the most pleasant things for me. I mean, it started internally, right, as the ISO SPOC, right? I have 2 calls a week for each hemisphere. So for the Eastern Hemisphere in the evening, for the Western Hemisphere the day after. And I just find the collaboration, the participation from my SWIFT colleagues to help each other out when questions are asked and I get stuck and I need a clarification. The number of invitations that I've personally received to speak at events like this. So, different events for banks, reaching out to their internal counterparties to promote their, their usage and their adoption of ISO. And I speaking from the Swift point of view, same for vendors, conferences. I think just knowing that everyone knows it's happening, everybody wants it to be successful. Like you said, we're all collaborating to make sure that there is interoperability, that nobody is deviating from the design, that we do something that can be used, I think is really a testament to the people that are working in finance and how we want to modernize payments, make sure that they're fast and that they get error-free, and we all work together, and the egos are put aside. No one's a competitor anymore. We're all working together on this. That's been the most pleasant experience. Yeah,
that's wonderful to hear. David, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I agree. It's we have a common good now together across the globe, which is ISO 20022, and it creates great opportunities to meet people around the globe, and it creates opportunities. So definitely, and when we started the project for ISO 20022, in particular for the mass payment systems, there were a lot of doubts from a number of people saying that ISO 20022 contains too much data, it will never work for mass payment, there's too much data, and so on. And with collaboration, training, education, you start to get people on board, they start to realize that yes, it is feasible, and create some momentum, and everyone has a common goal to achieve. And with community testing and with support from market infrastructure, from Swift and so on, then yeah, the momentum is going, and then we can achieve the target. And once that is done, I think it creates now a community that is more united and more happy to be together, and to find other opportunities actually, and other projects to continue this momentum.
Thank you, David. So we're coming to the end of the session. I want to thank all of you for sharing your expertise. There's so much to talk about this topic, and there's so much to anticipate. It has been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with all of you. I learned a lot. I'm sure the viewers will too. To our viewers watching, if you would like to learn more about ISO 20022, there are many good resources to check out. Marcus talked about various tools from Swift, so check it out from Swift's website, swift.com. Payments Canada's website also offers space for ISO 20022. It's available from payments.ca. And if you want to learn more about what's happening in EU, check out website ebaclearing.eu. And for Australia, feel free to go to auspaynet.com.au. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed the discussion.